Hi, so I'm going to be taking a little bit of a detour away from Philip K. Dick and be talking about Fyodor Dostoevsky and his short story Bobok, which was published as part of a larger collection of works, a diary that he self published in 1873. It is about a protagonist named Ivan Ivanovich, who is claimed by many, and this is where indeed there you do see a similarity between this story and many of Philip K. Dick stories. It's about a man who many others claim to be mentally disturbed. They even think he's incoherent. They even point out that in many of his stories that he uses, or in many of his letters, any of his writings, he uses too many parentheses and he's considered having a very strange perspective on life, which is pretty obvious, even though I think he's pretty articulate. Um, and one day he starts hearing voices. Can't figure out why he keeps hearing this word Bobok, Bobok being uttered to him over and over again. And and at first he thinks, okay, he's just crazy. This is just part of his mental illness. But then one day things do change. After a funeral that he stumbles upon at a graveyard for a distant relative, he has a few moments afterwards of silence where he's on his own, he's sitting in the graveyard, and then he starts hearing all of these voices coming from the grave. All of these people, basically dead people, ghosts, talking among each other, talking as if it were just any other day. Right? Like it's as if they're not even aware that they're dead. But in fact, they do reveal to him that not only are they dead for certain, but they know they are. And they explain that when people pass on, that their consciousness gets concentrated into a certain form in the body at that stage and lasts for a few days. They don't really explain what happens afterwards, if they cross over, if they pass on. But this is like basically a more, I guess, biological way of describing a ghost in the story. Um, and and actually, I take back a little bit. I'm not sure whether it's not. They don't actually make it clear whether it's concentrated in the body, but it is indeed concentrated in a certain form. And this is where it starts to make sense, where everything he's experienced starts to make sense. He encounters a corpse that's just barely conscious, but every now and then it will utter the word Bobok, Bobok over and over again. And in Russian, Bobok actually means little bean, which is like a funny, strange way of referring to nonsense. So, as far as we can tell in this story, and it doesn't really get explained any further, it's obviously a way of describing a kind of gibberish. And and then at the end he leaves the graveyard, and the experience is totally left open to interpretation. It's a complete mystery. It's particularly the title word Bobok, which the entire story revolves around, just sends chills down your spine and mine too, because of something that actually, the first thing I was going to point out about this that I think is probably the most interesting point in this entire story is that he doesn't refrain from almost the nonsensical, the absurd, even though we typically kind of associate those things with a much more light, more comical kind of genre, because we might think that if we use it in a more serious context, it will actually decrease the significance of something or detract from it. In this case, the absurdity is actually what makes it more frightening. It's even more ugly in that case. Um, and but there's also a flip side to it that I think that really made it a very powerful story to me, which is in some ways you kind of feel a little bit like you're a child who's been afraid of something. In this case, the concept of death. But the narrator almost feels like this almost grandfather, this sort of parental figure who amuses you to make you more comfortable with the concept, sort of guiding you through, making you feel like, oh, maybe it's okay. So there's that, it's very unsettling, but he also makes you feel at peace with the concept at the same time, which is a hard thing, I would say, a hard thing to pull off. Um, and and over that, there's this kind of veil of like sort of melancholy and this very strange atmosphere. Um, and it makes me think about actually another kind of distinction that I talk about in my own writing and the own story, the difference, the subtle distinction that you see between spooky and creepy. In this case, the story would fall into the spooky category, that it's very, it's otherworldly, it's uncanny, it's unsettling, but there's something at its core that's very beautiful. It has a kind of an allure to it. You don't feel repulsed by it. He doesn't ham it up too much, and like in many cases, things are done in the horror genre. Um, and so that is probably one of the most powerful stories that I've read, and because I think there's a lot of things in Russian culture that over the years that I've gotten very fascinated by. I've been learning Russian. I even I've listened to and read the story in Russian with a side by side translation, English on one side, Russian on the other. So it's been a big influence on my life. It's been helping me with my own work. And I think, Russian poetry in particular is beautiful. It's Pushkin is one of the other writers I've gotten into. Um, and I think also that this story actually runs a lot of parallels with Philip K. Dick, because Philip K. Dick indeed doesn't get into issues of consciousness. How much um, is consciousness really reliant on biology, and how much of it is rooted in things that we don't really fully understand, and also the question of sanity, reality versus fantasy, how the lines between those things blurring. That's another thing that Philip K. Dick talks about quite often, and it's strange that how many parallels there really are. I mean, it does even sound very similar, um, as if they had been literary companions in their life, and that's I think one good thing I can take away from this story.